Hi, welcome to another episode of Beyond Baseball, the last episode of season one. As always, I'm here and joined by Caleb Messi. Caleb, how are you doing?
I'm good. I can't believe that we are here at the end of season one. It's kind of crazy. Even when you mentioned it before we hit record, I was kind of like, "Whoa, yeah, we're here."
Yeah, it's wild to think that we've gotten down this route. I mean, we started middle of the last season of baseball season, and then we're gonna wrap up here at the end, and then kick off season two at the start of it, opening day of baseball. So we'll be bringing you some more interviews with some incredible guests. So it should be good. Before I dive into a couple of things that we want to get into here, I just want to talk about all the work that's being done at Prospects Live by a lot of the amazing analysts and scouts there. They have a handbook coming out soon, a scouting handbook. There's going to be 600 plus pages of hard work by all the analysts and writers that you'll be able to check out on Amazon. The links will probably be here in the bio as well. And then just subscribing to the Patreon. There's top 30s out there for everyone to take a look at for every MLB team. You get your top 30 prospects with a full scouting report and everything you need to know about these guys. So it's kind of cool. It's a lot going on here, but there's also a lot going on in the baseball season as well. We are fully in the swing of the World Baseball Classic. A couple pools have already wrapped up, but Caleb, what's one of the biggest highlights for you in the World Baseball Classic?
Highlights. One of them goes back to a guy we had on our pod. We're lucky enough to have Vinny on. Seeing Vinny in his, I guess, realm, like where he thrives, is pretty cool. And not only that, but like seeing the media like picking up on him and actually seeing the guy he is, the personality he has been pretty cool. But like on the field, I mean, it's very like non-baseball for me. Like I love seeing the culture stuff. I love seeing the guys. I love seeing the guys who like MLB teams have kind of declared as old or on the decline get this like rejuvenation from playing, or just get like just kind of some like burst of energy. And then it's interesting always to see younger guys, like guys who haven't yet made it to the show, facing major league prospects. So I'm being a little vague in my answer because it's hard to pinpoint one thing. I'm pulling for USA. I don't think that the moments have been the greatest for USA. It's been really cool to see Israel just like have a presence, but they're falling a little short. The Great Britain jerseys have been an interesting topic.
Ariel Font, man. Ariel Font.
I don't even know what it was. It looks like they just got them delivered.
Yeah.
And that there should be a sponsor on the back. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing the best players right now thrive. So it's always just so cool to see the cultures come together.
Yeah, you mentioned the young guys and talking about Great Britain. I mean, Harry Ford's batting cleanup, and he's considered one of the better prospects in baseball for the Seattle Mariners. And I think he's been in high A, maybe double A at this point. And so he's got a couple of years before he's going to reach the bigs, but he's facing Team USA and Mexico and all these guys who have some arms. So to see that kid just go up there and start competing. The one guy that stuck out to me, I have to mention this story because it was just so cool. Duque Hebert, I think is how you say his name, out of Nicaragua, strikes out Rafael Devers, Julio Rodriguez, and Juan Soto back-to-back. 21 years old, not with a professional team, signs a minor league contract with the Detroit Tigers that night after he did that. I mean, like, those are the stories that are just absolutely awesome. I mean, he topped out at like 90 miles an hour with his fastball, but they're probably saying projection, good slider, like that kid has a chance. So those are just the awesome stories. I love to see.
Yeah. I mean, and there's like the funny stories of like, Lars Newbar, being, with Shohei and just seeing what his social media has done, like for his brand, like even that stuff is just so cool because it's not like something they pinpoint definitely that they're going to, drive in on their social media presence and their followers in the off season, but like having this opportunity. I mean, Shohei has just been continuously Shohei. It's just been so crazy to see. I would even go further to see, guys like Rowdy with like Mexico, like saying that he's not even Mexican, or Alex Dickerson in Team Israel who's like, I'm not Jewish, but my wife is, and like all these kind of backstories. And we got some of this already. Like when we talked to Justin, like we got some of this, and that's just so cool. So like you're just adding to another story. It's more because of the WBC, what this did for that person's career.
Yeah, I mean, so what Caleb's mentioning is the last interview we had on episode 14 with Justin Wiley, who's playing with the Great Britain national team, and they got a win, so they might qualify to be in it next year. So I think that was their only goal, was get a W. And hey, they only lost 2-1 to Mexico, so they were in that game the entire time. So like countries like that are really trying to develop baseball. I mean, it's huge when they get that opportunity. I think there was a couple of them, like Colombia hadn't been in before, so all these other ones just making just getting this opportunity to really grow the game in their countries, which is just awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think now we have the last interview for you all was Devin Mesoraco, who played about 8 years in the big leagues with the Cincinnati Reds and the New York Mets. Has some amazing stories we'll get into here about catching probably the greatest rotation ever in New York Mets. Not ever, but like in recent history in New York Mets. And just some of the awesome things that he has had to say. But what was the biggest takeaway out of that interview for you?
So you asked me what the biggest takeaway is. I mean, I have 5 things written down. I'm going to start with kind of the biggest thing that is just, looking back, how humbling the game of baseball is. So, like, we knew that as fans. We knew that even when we played at such a minor level, not minor league, minor level, and how bad we were, and we knew that we weren't going to make it, right? So, like, we knew it was humbling. But to hear guys who have been there, who have gone through the journey, as we as fans would love to see, we as baseball enthusiasts, purists would love to see, just hearing how humble they are to speak about this whole experience. I'm not even gonna say like their playing career, because it's the life experience. So I've wrapped it up into a few things. So my first one is similar characteristics. As a researcher and as a professor, I feel like I have to categorize everything. So you've talked about this at length with like the relationships, how often relationships come up. I just think it's so cool to see, and it's not planned, how often these keywords come up, how often, we hear about relationships, we hear about transferable skills, and that could be all different kinds of skills.
We should make a tally.
Yeah, we should. And even like a highlight tape or like a compilation of like all these kind of different things of what they say. But I would categorize that as similar characteristics, hearing about everybody's journey. And it's very difficult as a person to say your journey and then want to understand that everybody has their own unique journey, because you can only speak of the lived experience, the lived journey that you have. So when we hear this from players, they're speaking from that perspective. And then it's kind of our job to distill it and break it down and say, like, we heard this, we heard this from this person, and your journey is this, but it taught you this. And we kind of look for the positives there. So I would say hearing everybody's journey, which is really our I know kickoff and tip off are the funny jokes on the Twitter, but I think hearing about the journey as the first question, and then kind of to capstone that, the last question that you always ask is like, what is your one piece of advice? Talk about a highlight tape or like a TikTok or Instagram reel. Like, that is something I would love to see, is to, take out each of that part of the, I guess, segment of the show and just kind of see what everybody's advice is and kind of make that like an archived library piece would be awesome. The last thing, and this is kind of like the icing on the cake or the cherry on top if I had to do it, we've had so many guests who have played great careers of their own, but that have also played with, players and people that have had their own right. Like, I'm thinking of, Catalanato and the Michael Young story. I'm thinking of Ryan and the Adley Rushman story. Like, just these like little things that come up. Or I think we had 2 or 3 guys who have played with Bobby Witt Jr. Those stories are just like, that's not why we're here. That's not why we're doing this. But it's just like when you hear that story as part of their journey, or that they can look back and have that perspective of like, I was able to play with this great player, and they're able to share that with us. That's even better.
Yeah, I agree. I think about like Steven Souza talking about Cody Bellinger and the experience that he had there. And I think it's just a lot of these guys, to me, the biggest thing that sticks out and the thing that I've enjoyed the most is hearing how they really separated themselves from baseball, right? They found these passions outside of the game that really just speak to the identity and who they are as a person, right? The baseball is something that they do, something that they love to do, and they go out and play every single day. But a lot of them have realize after they now retire that there's so much more to their life than just the game. They love the game still. It doesn't mean they hate baseball now all of a sudden that they've retired and they're not in the game anymore. But they found these passions in their love and things like that. And that's the one thing that stuck out to me in our upcoming interview that we're going to have here with Devin Mesoraco, is he talked about the power of family. And that's probably going to be the title of this episode, because he kept going back to how important his family was and how much his family changed his perspective for the better and like made him realize that there's this bigger thing on the outset of the game. And so I think that's one thing, like hearing those kind of stories is just incredible.
Yeah, for me, talking to Devin, I mean, we talked about this a lot, but like just being grounded, he's such a
Mhm.
grounded person. And looking back on that talk, and I remember like sitting there being like, wow, this guy is so humble. And like you mentioned with like catching, these great pitchers and
Yeah.
really being on some good rosters, not just the Mets, but like, coming up in the minors, being on the Reds, like all that kind of stuff. I think one of the things that I realized is the guy loves the strategy, the planning.
Hmm.
He loved it as a catcher. He loved working with pitchers, loved working with coaches to prepare for the game. He's doing the same thing as a coach, but now the coaching and that baseball aspect of his life has taken a backseat to his family, which I think, and I think you guys will agree after you listen to this, that we could say the same thing about how he's, dealing with his wife and his kids, and I'd say
Yeah.
dealing in a pitching pun there. But he talked about how during COVID he went on like a crazy trip. I'm not going to reveal the details, but like how much planning had to go into that trip. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I could just see him as a catcher, as a coach, doing the same thing. So I agree with you. Family, grounded, um, understanding just the planning and strategy that goes into life and baseball.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I think great way to wrap up. And we're going to turn you over to that interview with Devin Mesoraco. That'll kick us off for season one, and we'll be back on March 30th for season two. So enjoy the interview.
Enjoy it.
Alrighty, we are here with another incredible guest for Beyond Baseball. We have Devin Mesoraco, who spent 8 years in the big leagues with the Cincinnati Reds and the New York Mets, and now is coaching baseball at the University of Pittsburgh. Devin, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you guys? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on and kind of talk about your journey. You went from being a first round draft pick with the Reds and kind of had a pretty decent career. Take us into your journey through baseball, how you got to where you are, and how you made that transition to coaching after you retired from the game.
Well, that's a long story. That seems like a long place to start. Yeah. So my father was a coach growing up, right? So he introduced me to the game. I would be the bat boy, go to practice with him every night, and that's really where I would say that the joy of the game came for me. Right, it's just being at the field with my dad. And then from there, obviously, in high school and start playing travel ball and get better and start to get noticed. And I was drafted out of high school there in 2007 by the Reds. Played 4 years in the minor leagues, 4.5, I guess, and got called up to the big leagues in 2000 to September of 2011, and then was up, for the most part of 2012, 13, all the way to 2018 there. And then the coaching, right? So after I got done playing, then well, it's kind of a difficult time, and you kind of figure out what the heck you're going to do with the rest of your life, and you don't really know. And I always felt like coaching would be a good option, and this kind of opportunity at the University of Pittsburgh kind of fell into my lap, and it's been a really good fit. So I love to coach now, and just enjoy being around the game.
Devin, you talk about that being a tough time, and given your father's a coach, talk to us about what went down during that tough time. Was it a lot of interpersonal conversations, family conversations, friends? Talk about that tough time.
Yeah,
Into
my career, I would say, ended potentially somewhat abruptly, right? Like, I think I went to spring training with the Mets there in 2019. I got sent down to the minor leagues, and I just didn't really enjoy it anymore. And I felt like, I love the game. I love being around the game. I just didn't necessarily love playing the game anymore. I had a number of injuries. I wasn't the same type of player. And it just became a chore to show up each day, right? Like to get my body ready to go out there and try to compete and not be very good, right? Like I pretty much stunk at that point, in my opinion. So it became just very challenging and not fun. So I got sent down, after some conversations with my wife, and my parents and just everybody. It was my agents. It was kind of like, why continue to do this if you're not enjoying it? Let's go on to the next step. What that next step was at that point, I had no idea, right? Like I just knew that, hey, I don't really want to play anymore. So, I just went home and ended quite abruptly. And, you work your whole life on one thing, and that's your whole focus, right? Like I think that that's a lot of the players' mindset is their life revolves around their career and the success and the failures. Um, and then one day it didn't, right? So that day comes very, very quickly, and you're not necessarily prepared. I wasn't prepared for that day because that's not necessarily what I expected to have happen in spring training. Is just show up and retire, but it did, and then it's kind of like, well, what the heck do I do now? At the beginning, right? It's a very it's fun, right? Like we just enjoyed ourselves. We spent time with our family. Just had a lot of fun, and then it's like, okay, now we need something a little more tangible. I can't just be 30 years old and watch my son all day and cook dinner and go have a few beers with my buddy, and that, right, like that's not necessarily a very fulfilling life. So you kind of you're in that transition period where you're trying to figure out what you want to do, and at that point there in 2019, we were kind of like, yeah, what the heck are we going to do this summer? What are we going to do this fall? So I bought an RV. So we bought an RV, and I bought the RV in July. We left like the first week of September we just left and said, we're going to go see the country. We're going to go to the national parks. We're going to spend time just as a family. And whenever we come back, we come back. And I had planned out, we were going to hit 9 national parks and just spend as much time as if we were still enjoying ourselves and we want to spend 2 weeks at one place, we would. So we went to the Badlands. We went to Yellowstone, spent like a week there. We went out to Yosemite National Park, which was not that was an interesting story. We can maybe get to that. But we went out to the Big Sur and spent some time out there. Spent some time with family in California, and just hit up a bunch of things and just kind of enjoyed it. And that was kind of like the last fun thing before it felt like, hey, I would like to do something a little more, something with some teeth to it, right? And I always felt like coaching was probably what that was going to be, and so from there it was just kind of try to find a place that'll make me a coach, right? Because I hadn't done it yet, so it was kind of a new transition, and I think all former players feel like, well, it's so easy to coach this and that, and I think it's proven to be a little bit more challenging than that for me, but certainly that I always felt like coaching was where I would end up.
Yeah, I'm sure Caleb has a couple questions based on that. But the one thing I really like that you touched on too is how when you got the RV and went on a freeing trip, it's almost like you went from having that set schedule every single day in baseball to all of a sudden going on this trip with no routines, like no schedule, where you could just kind of have fun and enjoy.
See, that's the part that I liked about the whole trip, though, was kind of dictating what we're going to do for the day, right? Like I always like to be organized and have a plan and follow a routine, because that's kind of what you do in baseball, right? Like that was your whole day. I'm going to show up here, I'm going to do early work, do this, then this, and finish in the weight room, whatever. And so the trip, I kind of did the same stuff. As I tried to plan out my life, I was like, "What the heck are you doing? Just go with the flow, and we'll figure it out." But I did like that aspect. I like the aspect of like taking care of the RV and doing the things that I needed to do there, right? Because it was routine oriented. So all of those things, they still carry over into my life today, right? Where I do a lot better when I know what the plan is, can kind of control my own destiny and write things down. That always helps me. So it really definitely carries over.
Not to mention that he chose 9 national parks. There's a
Oh,
reason.
that was
There's 9
not.
positions. There's 9 innings.
Maybe I made that number up. Let me count the ones we went. So we went to the Badlands. We went to what is the Mount Rushmore? I think that's a national park.
Yeah.
We went to Yellowstone, Yosemite. I don't think the Big Sur is a national park. We went to Sequoia National Park. We went to what is it called? I can't remember. And then we went to Zion National Park. So it may have been 8. May have been 8.
He and the Big Sur.
We meant to go to the Grand Canyon. Yeah. By that time, everybody was. I think it was a 7-week trip, and by that time, everyone was like, probably time to head home. And I drove 18 hours straight home the last day because everybody was.
You missed the minor leagues. That's why.
Yeah.
I was going to ask. I mean, yeah, you're right, Jared. I did have a few questions. I mean, there's so many things to take out of here. One is you did a really good job of articulating it, almost like you're replaying it in your head, which is a skill to be able to do that. Not just say like this happened. Like it's clearly you went to therapy at one point, but it was cool that like you were just like, and then it happened. And I think like in my research for this stuff, and everybody who's listening to this podcast has heard me say this, it's not a singular moment. It's a process that's happening. So for you, it felt like a moment, like it just hit you in the face because you weren't prepared for that singular moment. But this process has been telling you, eventually it's going to happen. It's inevitable that's happening. You just don't know when. It's not like there's a door that you should just go through or open. But you said, I didn't like baseball. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't fun for me anymore. At what point did that mindset change to, now I want to go to coaching? Was there something I'd be like, I actually like this part? Maybe it is the prep. Maybe it is the routine.
Oh, I loved everything about the game, right? I loved being around the guys. I loved the pregame meetings where you talk about strategy, how you're going to go through the pitching. I loved leads. And when I was with the Mets there, the pitching coach kind of gave me he just allowed me to kind of run the pitchers meeting, and I love that, right? Like I love that aspect of it. I loved watching the games. I loved calling the game behind the plate. I didn't love to hit anymore. I didn't love to catch anymore, right? Like the actual skills that it took to do the job, I felt my game had deteriorated to the point where I wasn't good enough to be up there anymore. And it just, those things became not fun. I could still call a game very well. I could still lead a pitching staff. But as far as actually hitting and throwing and catching, I just didn't love to do that stuff. And that, once my injuries happened, right, like I had 3 years there where I had reconstructive hip surgery in 2015, reconstructive shoulder surgery, and reconstructive hip surgery on the other side in 2016. And then in 17, I was still kind of battling back from the shoulder. I broke my foot. So it was 3 years of like just kind of pounding your head against the wall, trying to get back to where I felt like I should be, where I was the player that I was in 2014. And I kind of realized that like I'm not going to be the same guy. I have to figure out a different way to do it, right? But my body just never put me in a position where I felt like I could be a good player again. And I don't want to blame my body, right? Like, that's also a lot of time missed, and your skills deteriorate the more time that you miss. And I don't want to say that like my whole career went downhill because of the injury. Certainly that had an impact on it, but I just wasn't good enough, plain and simple. It was pretty clear to me that game wasn't fun. I wasn't a very good player anymore. So let's just move on.
Yeah, in that transition process, you've clearly separated the physical and the mental, which I think is key, especially when you mentioned your identity. Like, this is all we know. This is all. You still knew that stuff, and you could still apply it as a coach. Just the physicality only got you so far, which is really, I mean, baseball's not a lifelong sport, no matter who.
Right.
Julio Franco defied odds, but it's impossible to play baseball like when you're 70. it's just impossible. So you keeping that mental thing is taking away from the physical in the regard like you can't do it anymore, but it's keeping you in the game and saying, I know that there's something I can do with the mental side of things.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed just by the way you articulate. I think it's super interesting for anybody who wants to, go into coaching or go into any other aspect, take some time off like you just mentioned, and then kind of look at yourself in two aspects, which is physical and mental, and see what you still have to offer.
Yeah, the coaching, it kind of came about there. Still, I helped out with a little high school team here in Pittsburgh area. I really liked that, right? I felt like I could pass some things on to those kids to help them. Also felt like the high school level, a lot of the stuff that I knew really well and could make a difference, it didn't necessarily apply, right? Because those guys are still at a level where, frankly, they're just working on catching. They're working on catching the ball. For me to have somebody tell them how to frame and move their thumb this way and that, right? Like, I'm not sure that was necessarily fit for me. So then it kind of transitioned to, all right, well, what is the next highest level still here in Pittsburgh that I can kind of help out with? And, it turned into Pitt. And it's been a really good fit.
I had to ask one question because you talked about how you really enjoyed leading the Mets pitching staff while you were there. And I'm sure a lot of those skills translated to the college level. But just kind of going back, how awesome was it to kind of lead that 2018 Mets pitching staff that was stacked with DeGrom and Syndergaard and Matz and all those guys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I got traded over there. I was traded for Matt Harvey there in May. And he kind of walked into the clubhouse and, that ended up being Jake's DeGrom's first Cy Young year, and so obviously he was a really good pitcher. Steven Matz was kind of an up and coming guy that had dealt with some injuries, but man, really really good left-handed stuff. And then Zach Wheeler was outstanding, right? Like at that time, I think he was coming off some injuries, but this difference between him and Jake was like. Just maybe like a half a grade below, right? Like everything was very sharp, crisp, just really, really good. And then Syndergaard obviously was super powerful, with the sinker and hard stuff, hard slider. He ended up missing some time that year, and I didn't catch him a ton. But that was honestly one of the highlights of my career, right? Like catching those guys. Pitching coach at that time was Dave Island. He was really good about kind of letting me run the game, and he really just kind of turned things over to me, ran the meetings, ran the game. Everybody, I did my homework, and they all put a lot of trust in me. By like the third start that I had with Jake, he kind of went into the office and said, hey, nobody else is catching me the rest of the year. And that was a good feeling, right? Like I think that that is what every catcher kind of strives to do. And I don't know that he was necessarily considered the best pitcher in the game at the time. I think that the next couple of years, right, he's kind of proven that, or proven to be one of the best guys. And so to have somebody of that caliber kind of say that, that certainly meant a lot, and something that I'll always remember.
Yeah, one of the things I'm curious, and this is kind of tangential in what we're talking about, is here you are coaching, college baseball players. You're at a, pretty big name school in terms of, it's a D1 program. Everybody knows it. Maybe it's not known as a baseball school, but still, and I know it's from your hometown, but you never played college baseball, right?
Yeah. Very weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not, I mean, it's weird. It's weird and it isn't, because you still know what, and this is kind of what I was going at. You still know the age of those people. You were just in the minors rather than college. But how do you relate to them? How do you break that down? They could easily, come back to you and be like, you never played college. What do you know? Even though you clearly know more.
So the 2021 season there, spring of 21, was my first year, and I honestly believe that I was signed with the University of Virginia, and I had committed there, and I went to see one game there before I committed, and beyond our first game of actually playing that 21 season, I had only ever seen one college baseball game in my life in person, right? And it was the game that I went to see at Virginia. So, like, yeah, I was 100% new, right? But also, these guys, we have a lot of Pittsburgh kids. We have a lot of Northeast kids, right? Like, they had seen me play with the Reds. They had seen me play, maybe with the Mets a little bit. I think that when you're a big leaguer and you're very influential to these kids, right? Like they listen and hang on to any word you say. So it became very easy for me to gain their ear just based on the fact that, hey, man, this guy had done it, right? Like he had been in the big leagues for 8 years. My word, they weren't very skeptical of what I was saying. They took it and ran with it. And I think that I give out good information, and I think that I give good advice for sure. And I think that the guys would say the same thing. But when you're a big leaguer, right, they listen to just about anything you say. So that part of it became pretty easy, even though I had never been in college. And I think that it's been a very good, easy transition.
I think that mental stuff you talked about. So the prep, the routine, going into the pitchers meeting, running that meeting, getting the Jacob DeGroms to, feel confident enough to have you as their personal catcher every day is something that you can bring. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in college, doesn't matter if you're 12 years old, like you can still bring that as a coach to them. So I think that is interesting. I was just curious if you ever face anything there. So it's an interesting dynamic considering someone from you could be like, I want to, coach in the minors, or I want to coach in high school. Like picking college and then being a coach in college is a totally different game.
Yeah, it's been a really good fit. I think that right now my life is all about my family. Being home with I have a 2-year-old daughter, 5-year-old son, not missing his t-ball games and being home with them and getting to enjoy summer family vacations, and none of those things I would be able to do if I was a coach in the minor league. So this has been a really, really good fit, and the coach down there, Coach Bell, is he's really good at, he kind of lets me do as much or as little as I want, right? Like he gives me a lot of freedom as far as doing stuff with the players. I help out with the pitchers, I run the catchers, but help out with the hitters. There isn't anything that, it's a really good fit where if I want to be involved with the recruiting, which, I don't necessarily enjoy that side as much. I love the scouting side, but, I don't have to, right? So it's been a good fit and I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. The one question I want to ask kind of before we wrap up into the last couple of questions, you talked a lot about having to overcome adversity and some of the injuries that you went through your career. How have you used those experiences to really help kids who might be going through some of the same things at the college level to help relate to them and kind of help them get through some of those injuries or moments of adversity that they might be facing?
Yeah, I think that, right, like an advantage to having a player that has so recently been playing, or having a coach that has so recently been playing, I can put myself in the shoes of those individuals very quickly and easily, right? Like, for example, like you said, if a guy is injured, right? When we've had some guys that you think you could run through a brick wall, right? Like you can do anything and you can go play, and they're out there limping around, and it's like, well, we're not. What I tell them is, we're not putting you on the field to just play, right? Like you have to be able to go out there and be productive. We have other players that can potentially be productive. You can't go out there and be productive, there's no reason to have you on the field, right? So I can tell them that I came back too early from one of my numerous injuries, and I stunk, and it's hard. So, let's work you in slow, maybe get you a midweek game before you go out there and have to compete in the ACC, face a Friday night starter, a guy that's going to be a first rounder, right? So it kind of makes things a little bit easier, and they listen to me in that regard. But even when it comes to the playing side, right? Like I could put myself in the shoes of my catchers, and if we're doing something, if they're doing something mechanically wrong, that they're over anticipating their need to get ready to block, and I can kind of work through that with them pretty easily. So yeah, it certainly helps that I have just recently played and can kind of put myself in their shoes.
Yeah. All right, Caleb, I'll turn over to you if you have one more question before we dive into the last one.
I have like a 2-part question. I want to learn more about you, the person. So one of the things, obviously we can hear your kids screaming in the background. My kids are downstairs and the dog is barking louder than them. Well, besides the RV trip, besides getting away from the game a little bit before you went back into coaching, my first question is, what are some of the things that you enjoy? How do you take maybe what you're not getting from playing, the physicality part, competing, that competitive nature into your life? Like, what are you doing? Not just playing, checkers or chess with people just to beat them. And then the other side of that would be, are there certain things that you're still missing that you're not getting either, from life, family, or coaching?
So let me start by saying, kudos to all the stay-at-home parents out there, whether it's moms or dads, because there's nothing harder than being home all day with kids, right? Like there's nothing more difficult than them scream, all this stuff that goes along with that. So that is a challenge for sure. And I am incredibly grateful that I get to spend as much time with my family as we do. Both of my parents and grandparents, or I still have some grandparents that live back in Punxsutawney. So we try to have holidays, come down for dinner on the weekends, try to do things of that nature. But for the most part, these days, mine and my wife is incredibly great about our life revolves around the kids. And let's do whatever we can to make their lives as good and as enjoyable as they can. So, we've taken a number of trips here, even after I sold the RV during the pandemic there. But we went to Hawaii this past summer. We went down to Disney. Our life is all about what we can do with those kids. It's your other question there is what can I do to kind of compete? So kind of about the same time as I did the RV, I started to do a little bit of woodworking, right? Like just kind of make up challenges and go make this. And I'd never done anything in my life, right? I didn't even know how to use a screwdriver. Well, my grandfather was a woodworker, and he got old enough that he couldn't use his tools anymore. So he gave me all his tools, and we needed an outdoor dining room table. And I said, heck, I'll just make it. And so that was a bit of a challenge, and that was kind of cool. And I got some fulfillment out of that. And now my wife makes me make kind of a bunch of stuff. So maybe it's good and bad, but that has been a good challenge. As far as the woodworking, the coaching gives me some of that same aspect, right? Mm-hmm. How do I get this kid better? How do I help him improve? That certainly helped out. What do you miss? You just miss the people, right? I think that's the thing that you miss the most. Yeah. Is I miss being in the locker room and talking shit to whenever I beat Jacob DeGrom for the 50th time in cards, right? I miss, in baseball, right? There's a lot of support people that their only job is to be there to help your career. And, they're very thankless people that, probably don't get enough credit for helping people out, whether it's coaches or the people that are in the weight room or the people that cook for it. All those people really the training staff, right? Those guys' careers are based on helping the players out, and just to really spend time around people like that, good people, and you miss that side of it, right? Just the people.
Yeah. Before I dive into the last question, I think it's awesome that you really have solidified the things that you value. You talk about the time with your family and being able to spend that time with them. And just talking about the importance of relationships, whether it's the relationships you made in the game and then taking that with you to your post baseball career. I think that's just incredible to hear. The last question that we always ask all the guests, just because again, as we're focusing on the transitions of athletes outside of the game, what's the one piece of advice you'd have for an athlete that's going through some of the things that you did and trying to figure out how to transition to that next step outside of baseball?
I want to add, I also went back to school, right? So I was drafted out of high school, and I had the college scholarship plan, and it was just kind of sitting there, and it was like, well, yeah, that would be a good challenge. So I do my days are full, right? Like I watch the kids all day during the day, go to practice, come home. I like to cook, so I'll make dinner and put the kids to bed, and then I start on my schoolwork. So
that's awesome.
I have a full day, and it kind of helps me with my routines, right, and my timing and all that. So it's good. One advice is you just lean on the people that you love, right? Like I think that's the most important thing. The transition certainly would have never been as easy without my wife. Right? Like she's my partner in crime, right? Like she's always there. We do everything together. So that was certainly made things a lot easier. And, my parents are still very influential in my life, right? Like if I have anything, they'll be down here in, 0.2 seconds, right? Talk to my dad all the time and talk to my mom all the time. So just lean on those people. My brother lives in Pittsburgh here now, and we spend a ton of time together. So all that stuff, I think that to get through any tough times, right? I think that is the most important thing is lean on the people that, really know you love them.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing to wrap up with. And Devin, we can't thank you enough for joining us. It's just amazing to hear your journey and kind of how you've ended up and found yourself outside of the game as well. So thank you for sharing your story and just taking some time to chat with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys for having me.